Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm going to be telling you about my favorite reads of 2023. These are all books that I read in 2023, not necessarily published in 2023. I'm going to give you my top three ranked books that I read in 10 different categories. I read across a lot of different genres, age ranges, and formats, and so every year I pick 10 categories where I had a lot of favorite reads and tell you about my favorites in those. So as I go through, it'll be ranked within each category, with the number one spot being the last one I talk about in that category. I'll also put a little star next to any of the books where I have standalone reviews in case you want to hear more about them. The first category is nonfiction, starting with We Crossed a Bridge and It Trembled by Wendy Pearlman, narrated by Erin, Bennett, Assaf, Cohen, and Susan Nezami. I absolutely loved this and I highly recommend it on audiobook. It is a collection of oral histories from Syrians about the Syrian civil war and sort of refugee crisis. Wendy Pearlman has an introduction where she gives you a little bit of background on the history and politics and issues that face Syria, but then the rest of the book is just oral histories from all sorts of different people about these different eras in the Syrian civil war. It is absolutely fantastic. Most of the quotes that are from people are pretty short, sometimes just a few sentences, sometimes, a short paragraph, but they're so impactful in just understanding the variety of experiences and perspectives on what happened. So if you're at all interested in learning more about what happened in Syria, I think this is such a powerful and just really immersive book to pick up. Next is How to Keep House While Drowning by Casey Davis. This is a self-help book that I really cannot recommend enough. It is so fantastic. It's incredibly short. If you listen to this on audiobook, I think it's less than 3 hours long, and it is just so actionable. Basically, Casey Davis takes the opportunity to examine all of the care work that we do. So caring for ourselves, for our families, for our household, and takes a look at some of the issues that we have where we tangle up ideas of morality, like I'm a good person if I do my dishes, but I'm a bad person if I leave them in the sink, that kind of morality judgment, and tries to separate that from the actual care task and, talk about how we should let go of those judgments and instead focus on what makes things functional for us. What is it that we need so that we can do our best in life? And so maybe if washing our coffee cup so that we have a clean cup the next time we want coffee, that could be a functional task, but maybe it's okay to leave that extra plate in the sink for the next time, right? And just kind of tries to separate that out, and it's just such really solid, good advice. I have recommended this to multiple people, and it is just so worth reading. I keep thinking back on it. So if you ever want something that's really short and just kind of helps you deal with any of that guilt or any of those issues of how do I even handle being an adult, I think is fantastic. And then in my top spot, I am already going to cheat a little bit. I've got two books, An Immense World and I Contain Multitudes by Ed Yong. So basically Ed Yong takes this spot because his nonfiction books are amazing. Basically, Ed Yong does this sort of nature science writing that is incredibly fascinating. If you ever just kind of wanted to hear about cool facts about nature, these are the books for you. So An Immense World is basically all about animal senses. So the way that they perceive the world, smell and sight, the way that it differs from humans. He interviews so many interesting scientists and you hear so many cool facts about the way that these senses work. It is fascinating. I Contain Multitudes is all about microbiome. So it's understanding the history of how we learned about microbes, and then also talking about the different ways that microbes work, how we interact with them as humans, how that affects our health, how it affects nature. It is just really, really fascinating. And every time I listened to both of these on audio, every time I listened to them, I was just like, oh, wow, that's so neat. I didn't know that. So if you like learning about nature, about science, I think these are just such wonderful books to pick up. If Ed Yong publishes anything else, I am for sure going to read it because these were fantastic. Now moving on to Memoir, starting with Solito by Javier Zamora. This is Zamora's kind of memoir of when he was a young boy, around 9 or 10 years old, making the trip across the border on his own, so unaccompanied. He went without his grandparents or his parents. His parents had been living in the US for a while, and they finally saved up enough money, and he was old enough to send him along on that route, illegally by himself. And it was an intense journey. It was very hard for him. And so it's just kind of all about that experience, about, how badly he wanted to be with his parents, but how hard that journey was. His writing is really gorgeous. It's so immersive. When you're in the story, you feel that you're completely in his head as the 9-year-old, right? It's just so incredible in the way that he's able to bring you into that experience. And it was really engaging and riveting. And the ending part was just so intense as he's kind of making that final push across the border. If you have any interest in memoirs or in hearing about people's immigrant experience, I think this is really worth picking up. Next is Ma and Me by Putsada Riang. This is Riang's memoir of growing up as a Cambodian refugee in Oregon in the US, and especially her relationship to Cambodia, to her American and Cambodian identities, as well as to her mom. Her complicated relationship with her mom is really something that this centers on, especially because she's so connected to her mom, but also has a lot of conflict with her because of the expectations of what being a good Cambodian daughter means, and how being queer, she sort of has to decide between her own identity and what's expected of her. And I thought that this was beautifully written, so compelling, provides a lot of interesting history about Cambodia and about that refugee experience, but it's really focused on family and that relationship with her mom. It's just absolutely beautiful. And my favorite memoir of the year was The White Mosque by Sofia Samatar. This is incredibly beautifully written, very immersive, and it does something really interesting where it tells Samatar's story of her life a little bit, but the majority of this story is focused instead on her relationship to her religious community. So she grew up in a Christian religious sect where her mom is, from the US, but her dad was from Africa. There's sort of a lot of missionary work there. And so in this very white community, growing up as somebody who is both white and Black was a little bit othering, but she's also exploring all of these ideas while going on a trip to Uzbekistan, where a bunch of members of that religious sect had gone in the 1800s, and sort of following their footsteps and examining the religion as a whole and examining her relationship to it, its relationship to people of different areas, and sort of the history of struggle and inclusion and exclusion. And it's just a really incredible memoir that also looks at history and religion and identity, and it just really, really worked for me. I thought it was absolutely fascinating. And if that sounds at all interesting to you, please do pick it up, because I thought it was wonderful. Now moving on to poetry, starting with There Are Trans People Here by H. Melt. This poetry collection I thought was just so full of joy and community and ideas of what the trans future could be. I think that there's such an issue with trans people's lives not being valued, with them not getting to live these full and complex lives exactly as they want to. And so I think this poetry collection just was so amazing in the way that it imagined spaces and positive opportunities and community and all of these things for trans people. And I thought that was just really lovely to read, so I quite enjoyed this poetry collection. Next is Black Queer Hoe by Brittany Black Rose Capri. This is a really fun poetry collection. I laughed so much while reading this. It's a little bit raunchy, but it also is just so in your face of just saying, I am here, I am taking up space, here's my experience, I'm celebrating myself, I'm celebrating my sexuality and my Blackness and my absolute desire to be who I am without apology. It was such a fun read. I think that I love the way that it talks about identity and politics, and it's just, if you like political and identity-based poetry and you're interested in something that's just kind of having a fun time with it, I really recommend this one. And my favorite poetry collection of the year was A Little Resurrection by Selena Umwulu. This is a poetry collection that is all about grief and identity and displacement. It's about, being the child of immigrants. It's about, who fits where in what country. How do you relate to that place? How do people relate you to that place? It's about her relationship with her parents, especially her father. It's about her just finding kind of a way to process her identity and her grief. And it was incredibly moving. It's all of the sorts of themes that I love. And I thought that this was just such a wonderful poetry collection. Now moving on to middle grade, starting with King and the Dragonflies by Kaysen Callender. This is a middle grade that is focused on a boy who's dealing with a couple of big issues in his life. The first is that his older brother has passed away recently. His family is grieving, but they don't really know how to talk to each other. He's also dealing with kind of an issue where a good friend of his at school went missing, and also dealing with the issue of kind of his own sexuality and understanding that and trying to deal with what that means in terms of his community and his family and society in general. This kid is just trying to grow up, trying to do the best that he can, navigating very complex issues. And it's all about him and his family and his friends and trying to work together. So it does everything that I love in a middle grade, just that focus on friends and family. It's really emotional and just tackles some really interesting topics. So I loved this one. Next is Meow or Never by Jazz Taylor. This is a contemporary middle grade about a girl who's dealing with a lot, but especially dealing with some really crippling anxiety. And she ends up sort of getting involved in the school musical. And now she's got a lot of anxiety about that because performing on stage is just such a big deal. But she finds comfort in a stray cat that she finds, and really it's like a kind of an animal that can help her process some of the anxiety and the emotions, while also making friends with another girl and sort of falling in love with her in her class. This has a lot in terms of that anxiety rep, and I think that was handled really, really well. But it's also just got so much sweetness and so much heart, and I just was really moved by it. And my favorite middle grade of the year was María Khan and the Incredible Henna Party, although truthfully, the entire series, by Sadia Faruqi, illustrated by Annie Bushry. So this is a kind of chapter book, so young, very young middle grade reader series that is all about María Khan. María Khan is such a fantastic character. I love her so much. She's, I think, in third grade, and she is just so difficult. She wants to be in charge of everything. She wants everybody to pay attention to her. She wants to do things her way. And in this book, one of the girls in her class, who she's a little bit rivals with, is going to have a very spectacular birthday party, basically the same weekend as Maria's own birthday, which normally just involves pizza and a friend coming over. And Maria so badly wants to also have a really impressive birthday party. And so she starts telling everyone that she's gonna have an incredible birthday party and there's gonna be henna and all sorts of other things there, except it's not true. And so this is all about the consequences of that and her dealing with that, her dealing with trying to convince her family that they should actually put on this party. I loved her as a main character. I love the dynamics and the interactions with her family and her friends. She's really just so great. And I love this book and I love the series. So if you have any interest in young middle grade, I really recommend picking this up. Now, aging up a little bit, we'll look at my next category, YA, starting with Messy Roots by Laura Gao. This is Gao's memoir of growing up in Wuhan and then later in Texas as an immigrant, and really kind of what that meant for her growing up and how she sort of adapted that immigrant experience, but then as an adult, really dealing with some of the complications of being queer when that's not something that is very easy for her family to handle, and being from Wuhan when the pandemic broke out and what that meant and sort of the anti-Asian sentiment and, you know, how that's like very hard for her to reconcile also with her memories of Wuhan and all of this kind of complicated emotion surrounding that. The illustrations in this were just fantastic. The colors, the way that she used her drawings to kind of convey ideas, it was really, really well done. If you like graphic novels, if you like memoirs, if you like YA, really recommend this. Next is Highly Suspicious and Unfairly Cute by Talia Hibbert. This is a YA romance that is about two high schoolers who used to be friends in middle school, and then they had a falling out, and now they're sort of rivals, enemies, but they both end up needing to go to this sort of special woodsy camp thing in order to be eligible for a scholarship for college, which they both very much want. And so there's close proximity that is forced. There's kind of a friends to enemies to friends to lovers storyline. I loved this. I loved the two main characters. The guy in this is somebody who's dealing with a lot of kind of issues related to OCD and anxiety, and he's very gentle but also popular. And the girl in this is somebody who's very abrasive and kind of a little bit social outcast, but she's just such a firecracker. I loved her too, and their relationship as it developed was really, really sweet. And I loved this. I was laughing and just so happy reading it, so I thought it was fantastic. And my favorite YA this year was Her Good Side by Rebecca Weatherspoon, which is another YA romance. This was just so sweet. This is about, again, two characters who are in high school. One who is a girl who kind of hasn't been in relationships before, and she sort of wants to start dating, but she's got this reputation as being somebody who has no clue when it comes to relationships, and nobody wants to get involved with her. And the guy is somebody who basically got really hot really quickly. So he grew like a foot taller, and now he's got all of this interest from people around him, but he's really shy and he doesn't know how to date. And so he keeps getting asked out, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And so they decide to fake date so that he can gain some experience and ask questions of like, what should I do? And so that she can get some experience on her resume of dating so that people will consider dating her. It's such a cute premise, and their relationship is just so fun. And because they're in this fake dating relationship, they're constantly communicating and talking about, okay, so what should we do? What's the appropriate thing to do in a relationship? But they're also completely falling for each other. And it's just so, so sweet. It makes my heart just clench with so much happiness. It's excellent. So yeah, I really loved this one. Now moving on to graphic novels, starting with M is for Monster by Talia Dutton. This is such a cool sort of Frankenstein retelling that focuses on family and identity and grief. So in this, we have a scientist whose sister has passed away, and she decides that she needs to kind of resurrect her sister. And so she does, kind of a la, Frankenstein's monster. And we see this from the sister's perspective as she is trying to figure out what to do because she doesn't have any of the memories that she's supposed to have. But she's worried that that means that the scientist will kind of destroy her as a failed experiment. And so it's about their relationship as the sisters. It's about M's sort of working through what is her identity now? How does this relate to who she was before? What are the kind of familial expectations? There's also the scientist's grief over the loss of her sister and what she's been doing in order to try to deal with that, not really process it. And so it's just got these fantastic themes. The artwork is beautiful, and it's just such a really well done story. Next is Pardalita by Joana Estrela, translated from Portuguese by Lynn Miller Lockman. This is a really beautiful and quiet graphic novel that is all about two girls in high school falling in love. The main girl that we follow is somebody who's very quiet, very shy, very unsure of who she is. And so this is very much a coming of age story for her, of even figuring out for the first place that she's queer, and then figuring out what does it mean to, have a crush on somebody and to try to pursue a relationship with them. The artwork in this is so beautiful. It has also just a lot of interesting play with form and shape. And there's some sort of poetry also mixed in with this. It's really quiet and really in the moment and poetic and beautiful. So I really highly recommend it. And my favorite graphic novel of the year was Shubeik Lubeik by Dina Mohammed, translated from Arabic by Dina Mohammed. So this is sort of a set of three interconnected stories that imagine a contemporary Egypt where jinn and wishes are true. They're something that exist and have existed for, quite a few generations. But wishes have become commodities, and there are different levels of wishes. So you can get the really cheap rung wishes, you get the Minnesota can, or you get the really expensive wishes, which you get in wine bottles. And there's, different levels of how good these wishes are and what they do to you. So the world building in this is fantastic. The way it has so much commentary on Egyptian society, and the way it explores different aspects of Egyptian life and community through each of these stories is really well done. Plus, the artwork is fantastic, and it integrates all kinds of different like data visualizations. It's just really well done. And I think that if you like SFF, you should for sure pick this up. But if you just like graphic novels in any form, I really recommend this. I think it is so well done. Now, moving on to translated fiction. This is the first time that I've had this as one of my categories for favorites of the year. I've been trying to read more translated fiction, and this year I actually had quite a few favorites. Starting with A Double Life by Karolina Pavlova, translated from Russian by Barbara Helt. So this is a story this is a classic. This was written in the 1800s, and it is basically a satire, a very feminist satire of society life. So if you like something like Jane Austen, you might like this book. What's really interesting too is that this story has kind of two parts. So it's called A Double Life. And basically it's about this young girl who is kind of being put on the marriage market. Her mom is trying to arrange a good match for her. And during the daytime, it's all about that. And then at nighttime, she dreams, and the dreams are all done in the form of poetry. And so it alternates narrative with poetry. And the poems are all about the inner life of this young girl, about her dreams and her potential. And the satire during the day is making a lot of commentary about the way that women's potential is really curtailed and crushed by society. So it has quite a bit of satire. It's a little bit sad in that way, but it is just beautifully written and really, really fascinating. Next is Diary of a Void by Emiyagi, translated from Japanese by David Boyd and Lucy North. This is also a very feminist story. This basically talks about a woman who is an office worker, and she is just fed up with the way that, because she's the only woman in her office, she's constantly expected to do all of the care work. So the cleaning up and the throwing out of the trash and the making of the tea and all that sort of stuff. And so one day she just sort of on an impulse lies and says, oh no, I can't handle taking that stuff out. It'll make me nauseous because I'm pregnant. And that sort of spirals. And so this lie becomes bigger. But what's really interesting about this is it's kind of a surreal novel. And it doesn't really focus on the lies so much as what this means for her, being able to claim space for herself, to claim care for herself that wouldn't be afforded to her as a woman, but as the vehicle for a new life people afford her, except she's just taking it for herself. And I loved the way that the theme was explored, and just the kind of surreal way that the story played out. And just, yeah, I loved this. I thought it was really, really curious and so well done. And then for my top spot in translated fiction is actually two books again, How to Order the Universe and How to Turn into a Bird by María José Ferrada, translated both of these from Spanish into English by Elizabeth Breyer. So these books are both so amazing. I read them one right after another this year, and then I went and read also all of María José Ferrada's children's picture books, because she has a lot of those out, but these are the only two novels, and they are just amazing. So How to Order the Universe is actually a little bit of auto-fiction. It's about a girl growing up in like the 70s in Chile, where her father is a traveling salesman, and she ends up kind of ditching school to go with him and sell a lot of these things. And she sort of builds an understanding of the world around her through these experiences, through the catalog of the things that they're selling. It's all about kind of that coming of age, but her relationship with her father, her understanding of the world. It's whimsical and beautifully written, and just so fascinating and a little bit surreal in the way that it approaches things. How to Turn into a Bird is a story about a boy whose uncle gets a job basically taking care of a big billboard, and then just decides that he's going to go and live up on the billboard and sort of be with the birds. But there's a lot of backlash in the society around it, and it's all about this boy trying to understand his uncle, understand the society around him, and the way that that backlash happens. And again, there's a lot of social commentary in both of these. They're both really whimsical and surreal. The writing is stunning. I really, really highly recommend these to just everybody. They're both so short as well. And I cannot wait for Ferrada to publish more books because I just want to read more by her. Now moving on to romance, one of my favorite genres, starting with Kiss Me Catalina by Priscilla Oliveras. This is the second book in the Queens of Mariachi series, and it was so good. So this series is basically a retelling of Shakespeare plays that takes place in Texas following a group of women who are in like a family mariachi band. I mean, what a great premise, right? So Kiss Me Catalina is a retelling of Taming of the Shrew, and I love the way that Oliveras dealt with this because Taming of the Shrew, there's some issues with that story, but I loved the way that this happened. We basically have a hero who is a guy who's very well established in mariachi. He's sort of the prince of mariachi. And then we have this up and coming woman who's part of, her family's mariachi band, but she gets the opportunity to go with him and sort of tour with him as his opening act and also help him write songs. And she is all about, smashing that glass ceiling. But she's sometimes a little bit, impulsive and doesn't think things through, or doesn't, she's not considerate of other people's feelings. And so it's about both of them sort of coming together and balancing each other and working together through their issues. And it's just, there's a lot in this also about their relationships with their fathers. There's quite a lot of interesting family dynamics there, and I just thought every part of it was so well done. It was really gripping. The chemistry was fantastic, so highly recommend this book and the whole series. Next is Make a Scene by Mimi Grace. This is a contemporary rom-com that has like such a cute premise. Basically, we follow a heroine who owns her own bakery, but her ex is now getting married to her cousin, and her whole family sort of pities her, and she wants to show up to the wedding with a very hot date and be like, no, I'm doing fine. So she convinces the person who owns the boxing gym next door to her to fake date her, and it is so cute. Not only is there baking stuff, which I always love, but oh my gosh, the dates that they go on, the fake dates to get to know one another, the fake dates where they're, going in to meet her family. It's just so sweet. Like one of their first fake dates, they end up accidentally, unintentionally doing an eating competition. It's just like so fun. It's really got a lot of humor. It's got a lot of sweetness. There's also a lot in this about family and about sort of dealing with the issues that your family has and sort of growing and learning from that and really choosing how to live your own life. And I love the way that they come together. It's just so sweet. And if you want a lighthearted but meaningful romance, I really recommend this one. And my favorite romance of the year was Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. This was so gorgeous. This is basically about two guys who are hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, both of whom are dealing with some things. One of them is dealing with having come out as gay to his family recently and sort of being disowned. They're very, very highly religious and trying to figure out what he wants to do next in life. And the other, who's kind of a little bit of a disaster. He hasn't had the best luck in life, hasn't made the best choices, but he finally has gotten his nursing degree and he's like, no, I'm gonna set my life on the path that I wanted. I'm gonna, stop making all of these bad mistakes and dating all of these wrong men, and just really actually live like a good, proper life. And then they meet on the trail and they start becoming hiking buddies, and very slowly they start to want something more. This is a really, really slow book. It has a lot of nature writing. It has a lot of introspection. Each of them is dealing with so much that they need to kind of work through on their own, which is why they're on the Pacific Crest Trail. And so it's them working through that, but also coming together. It was so beautiful, so heartwarming, and just so slow and reflective. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I really loved it. And the next category is one that I basically made up, but I really love it, which is cozy reads. I love cozy reads, and I had quite a few this year, so I wanted to give them their own category. Starting with Tides of Magic by Andy R. Christopher, which is a pen name for Andy C. Buchanan. Buchanan is a New Zealand author who is non-binary and I think neurodivergent and just queer, and like writes these amazing things that are books set in New Zealand focusing on characters with those kinds of identities. And in this first book in a new novella series, it's basically a cozy mystery urban fantasy about a young woman whose sister goes missing and she needs to find out what happened to her sister, but the kind of traditional ways of approaching that are not working. So as a last resort, she goes to a witch, and this is in a world where it's just normal contemporary life, but she goes to this woman who turns out to be a sea witch and ends up kind of discovering that she has her own connection to the sea. She's also dealing with kind of basically realizing that she has ADHD, and that's why she struggled so much in life and how to process that. And there's also this mystery of what has happened to her sister and trying to find her. It's really gentle and really sweet. There's some queer romance in this. There's just a lot about identity and coming into yourself. And I really adored this first installment, and I've already read the second one and loved it as well, and I can't wait for more in the series. Next is Under the Mistletoe by Leonore Solis, which is a Christmas romance about two people who do not get into the spirit of Christmas. This was such a sweet novella. It is just about these two characters who are very opinionated, and they get thrown together basically on a Christmas planning committee for this small town where they both live. And they are both grumpy together and sort of support each other in that. And what I loved about this story is it's filled with all kinds of Christmas goodness, but the two main characters just do not buy into it, and they're never reformed. They never buy into it, and I loved that. I love grumpy characters getting to be grumpy, but also they're just so considerate of each other, and they have such great conversations about kind of what they want out of life and trying to come together. It's just really adult and mature, but also cozy and sweet and wonderful, and it was just such a quick, short read, so I loved this. And my top cozy read this year was The Mimicking of Known Successes by Malka Older, which is the first book in a kind of sci-fi novella, cozy mystery, sapphic romance series. I mean, lots of my buzzwords here. But basically this takes place many years in the future. There's a colony on Jupiter, and we follow two women, one who is basically a detective who's trying to find out what happened to some kind of missing person. And she ends up reconnecting with her old lover from when they were in college, who is a professor at the local university, to get her to help figure out what has happened. It's very much like a Sherlock Holmes style of mystery, but it's got way more cozy elements, and it's got the sapphic romance. It's very slow, very gentle, but it has this nice mystery that's just pulling you through. And it was just so fun and so immersive to be in. I loved it, and I cannot wait to continue the series. And my last category is science fiction and fantasy, which I've combined this year, but I have some really fantastic reads for, starting with Drinking from Graveyard Wells by Yvette Lisa Ndlovu. This is a short story collection that includes both fantasy and sci-fi elements, but really focuses on Zimbabwean characters and culture and history. It has these amazing stories that use speculative elements to really examine, with a very feminist lens, issues related to just the way that Zimbabwean culture has evolved, the way that kind of Zimbabwean myth kind of fuels a lot of ideas, the way that women are treated, the way that Zimbabweans versus other parts of the world are treated. There's a lot about immigration in this, and the world building is so fantastic, just the way that speculative elements play into the examination of these ideas. I think that a lot of these stories are also very literary in their feel. Not only is the writing just really gorgeous, but there's a lot of layers and a lot of subtext and things to unpack as you read, and the way that the speculative elements are used to kind of fuel that deeper layer of meaning is really stunning. I highly recommend this if you like short stories, if you like anything SFF. It was really outstanding. Next is Mammoths at the Gates by Niveau, which is the fourth book in the Singing Hills Cycles series. This is a series of novellas that are fantasy inspired by Vietnamese culture and myth and history. And we follow the cleric Chi, who basically records stories and histories. But in this fourth book, they are going back to the monastery that they're from. And when they do so, they find that the head of their monastery, who they were very close to, has passed away, and there are some members of his previous family who have brought their war mammoths to the gates of the monastery and are demanding to take the body home, even though that's no longer a right that they have since that person became a monk. And so it's about that conflict. It's about identity, about who we are, and how different kind of people in our lives remember us or value us. And it's also about grief, how we process the grief, how we remember the people who have passed away, how there can be a lot of different facets to them, how we, just deal with that grief internally. It's also about just identity of people who are returning home and how they see the people who they've left behind, how those people see them. So there's so many fantastic themes in this, and just the plot line as well is really perfect for that novella length. It was incredibly gripping and just really beautiful. I absolutely loved this, and I recommend the whole series. And finally, my favorite SFF read this year was Arboreality by Rebecca Campbell. This was amazing. This is a novella set in the near future that is basically sci-fi climate fiction that is also really literary and really beautifully written and focuses so much on nature. The premises of this is basically looking at 50 to 100 years in the future at Vancouver Island, which is in British Columbia. People there who kind of get stranded as kind of worsening climate means that they're disconnected from the mainland, and sort of how they handle that, how they survive, how they adapt to nature, how things sort of worsen, but also how they adapt and make changes and work with nature as well. It's got a really realistic look at the way that these sorts of breakdowns in society could happen, but also has this really amazing idea of how nature itself could evolve, and how humanity could become different without sugarcoating anything. So it's got this really complex discussion while having gorgeous literary writing, beautiful nature writing. I found this incredibly immersive, and it was just doing such interesting things. So if you want that kind of sci-fi that really makes you think and consider, but also connects you to the characters, I think this is outstanding and really, really worth picking up. Okay, so those are my favorite reads of 2023. There's actually a ton more books that were favorites that I couldn't even fit on this list, but this is just such a fantastic grouping of books. I really loved these. If you guys have read any of these, I'd love to know your thoughts, or if you're interested in them, or if you read anything amazing this year this past year that you'd like to share with me. I'd love to hear about it. Just leave me a comment down below.